Yeah, Dan's an inspiration for you. Thank you. Show you round of applause for that.
All right. Am I on? Yeah. All right. Thank you for the kind words. Wasn't not planning on going on the deep end right now.
Go off the deep end.
I think I'm back in February, at which point I'm intending to be off the deep end. So, how much time do we have? What's that?
25 minutes.
25. You're not leaving.
Well, I said you've all evening.
I've all evening. Oh, okay. Well, I have had a wonderful time here, and thank you for having me. I've had a number of people ask me in the sides about the meter and nutrient density and how that's all going, and some of them I've answered in long form, and others I've told I'll be talking about it at the end of the day. So wait and get your questions then. I did talk about what we're doing as far as nutrient density to some extent yesterday morning. I gave some of the background on the preliminary work. It might bear a small amount of repeating. I think my formal topic here for today is where do we go? How are we going forward? What's the vision going forward? And I think one of the key points to focusing on for farmers, which I think is the primary audience here, is economic viability, and that is part of the core strategy behind nutrient density that we've been developing now and working for almost 15 years. So I'm going to talk about the background of nutrient density, the concept, the sort of the definition process, perhaps a little bit of the how it's proceeded. I'll talk not so much about what we did in the first 5 years, but give some key highlights from the beef project, which is our current project, and then would like to have as much engagement as possible. So I'll try to keep my comments to a minimum, and then as much time as Sean and others have for Q&A. I really look forward to that happening. So, as some of you may know, I did grow up on an organic farm. I've been in the farming movement. My parents ran an organic farming organization for 35 years, basically their entire career. So I have been an active part of the sustainable ag community for basically my entire life. And that has provided me some insight and context and perspective. I've seen a lot of isms rise and fall. Some people have heard about permaculture, you've heard about agroecology, you've heard about biodynamics, you've heard about regenerative, you've heard about slow food, you've heard about local. There's all these sort of, I would say, isms out there which have good, solid impulses, but in my perspective, are not necessarily focused on the nutritional quality of the food specifically the human health outcome, specifically the soil health outcome, and more broad sort of process frameworks. And I'll just use the example of organic in my experience. Growing up on an organic farm, my parents were, as they worked for an organic farming organization in the 1980s, they were critically involving in helping to write some of the first organic standards in the U.S. At that point in time. And I remember being in 4th grade and telling my science teacher that I was an organic farmer, and she said, organic means contains carbon, you silly child. All farmers are organic farmers. And then it was about 3 or 4 years later when the LR scare happened and everybody somehow realized that organic meant no chemicals. And then it was a couple years after that when the federal government came in and said, thank you, social movements, grassroots people, for building this momentum around an alternative to the conventional system. We're going to take that word over. We own it now. And it took them about 10 years to figure out how they were going to do that. They tried to get GMOs in, and they tried to get irradiation in, they tried to get sewage sludge in, and it was a massive social movement to resist them. But finally, the government came in, they took it over, and now we have things like CAFOs. Pigs never seeing ground, chickens never seeing sunlight, blueberries never seeing soil, that are all part of the organic certification system. So I have a background in watching social movements, impulses, building certification systems coming along, corporate governmental forces perverting them. And this is a significant concern I have for the regenerative community at this point in time. I have been watching that happen. I've been talking to some of the people behind the big movies and the sort of the most loud social media communications about this. I'm like, regenerative, soil carbon, soil health. climate. I'm like, these are all really great concepts, but if you make too much noise too fast without hard science backing it up, you're going to build buzz and you're going to get sideswiped. Greenwashing is going to come along. Corporates are going to take it over, and it'll be just like any of the other fads in the movement that have transpired, which I think is happening. So with that context, that understanding, this is part of how I have designed this concept of nutrient density, is to be hopefully unable to be perverted, right? To have some foundation that would make it very difficult to turn sideways. And so this, I want to, sorry for the introduction, I know we have a little bit of time, but I really wanted to sort of share that context. I got into this topic as a farmer at Acres USA. For those who are not familiar with Acres USA, it is certainly one of the homes of the elders in this broader movement. I really appreciate what you guys are doing here, as really sort of carrying that lineage forward, the biological ag perspective, not being attached to any sort of certification or framework, understanding it's about life. And the books that you have for sale out there are really some great ones. So of all the conferences and organizations I speak to, it seems like you guys are really actually one of the more dialed in communities. So I'll pat yourselves on the back for that, for whatever it's worth. I do travel quite a bit, and this is, the level of understanding in this community is high. So as it, again, pertains to nutrient density, the basic concept is that there's a spectrum of variation in nutrient levels in food. There's the most exceptional tomato that was ever grown. There's the most rudimentary tomato that was ever grown. It's not like there's a 50% point, and everything above 50% is nutrient dense, and everything below 49 is not. The way I've been envisioning it is there's the 2nd percentile, and the 20th percentile, and the 40th percentile, and the 80th percentile. And nutrient density is a framework by which we can assess the relative quality of food. We can say, this tomato sits at 20 out of 100. This tomato sits at 80 out of 100. This is a framework where we would be providing people with the ability to directly assess themselves. You do not need the certification system. There is no certification system. There is no labeling, marketing, claims, framework, no bureaucracy. It's direct perception. I oftentimes use the metaphor of religion versus spirituality. I hope no one will take too much offense here. We've got Methodists and Presbyterians and evangelicals and Catholics and all your different other versions of Christianity, not to mention other religions. And, in some cases, people get sort of, shall we say, superior. Well, we're Methodists. You Presbyterians don't quite have such a good connection to the divine. I would suggest it doesn't really matter which building you go to commune in. The most important thing is how direct your relationship to the divine is. Do you think it's appropriate to have a priest tell you what God has to say to you? Or do you think it's appropriate to talk to God directly and listen to God and have that living conversation? I would use that metaphor for an organic certification, for instance. The bureaucracy of organic is a priesthood that tells you what is good and what is bad, as opposed to the direct nutritional value of the food. Does that metaphor follow for anyone? These are sort of some of the conceptual frameworks that are a bit outside of the box. We're trying to get rid of certifications and labels and marketing and claims. We want to get to direct perception. It's not a binary, like local or not local, regenerative or not regenerative, organic or not organic. It's 20th percentile what it could be, 40th percentile what it could be, 80th percentile what it could be. These are actually significant, shifts in framing of how we communicate food. These are some of the strategic positions that I've been working to develop around this topic for, as I said, now the last 15 years. The foundational structure by which we propose this occurs is a handheld meter. The concept is if we can read what stars are made up of 50 million light years away, or 3 billion light years away, or even 5 light years away, with a flash of light, which we can, why can't we read what a carrot is made up of a millimeter away? Right? We can. Right? The power of computing and technology in your smartphone is superior to the Apollo 11 lander on Mars, on the moon, right? People know about this? The technology that we've got, the sophistication of technology that we've got in our pockets now is profound in relation to where we were at 50 years ago. There is absolutely no technological reason why we should not have the ability to directly perceive the chemical nature, the nutritional nature of what is in our food. So this is the foundational vision about how this would occur. How do we get through the certification systems and the labels and the claims? Is we give people the ability to directly assess in their hands, so they don't need to trust anyone, and put the fear of the Lord into the supply chain. I use the example of milk. Sometimes I'm discussing there are 3 different sort of companies in the United States that are oftentimes on the shelf as far as having organic milk. There's Stonyfield, there's Organic Valley, and there's Horizon. Those are 3 of the sort of bigger organic milk purveyors in the States. And I sort of provide a thought experiment. If you had 25 people in the United States that had a meter that was calibrated to nutrient density in milk, and each one of them bought one of those 3 jugs, all 3 of those containers, brought it home, opened the container because you can't flash light through cardboard very well. Then you have to buy it, in this case, take it home, open it up, flash a light. One of them's 20 out of 100, one of them's 40 out of 100, one of them's 80 out of 100. If 23 of those 25 people found that, we'll say in this case, Stonyfield was 80 out of 100, and put that information out onto the internet via social media, Facebook, whatever it would be, our hypothesis is that word would get around, right? That people would then begin to make purchasing decisions accordingly. It's not like every single person has to have a meter in their hand, but if we can get to the point where meters exist and people have that capacity, that information will get out. And that is the kind of incentive that we need to inspire corporates to focus on nutrition as opposed to volume. So understand that is a sort of the broader context. As I said, I think a bit yesterday, we started with this project in 2016. We identified 3 things we needed to accomplish should this vision be plausible. For this vision to be plausible, there were 3 major questions out there. The first was, do nutrients vary dramatically? Our hypothesis was, yes, nutrients do vary dramatically in food, from this carrot to that carrot. The formal scientists we were talking to said, no, we don't think they do. The second question was, if nutrients do vary dramatically, we think that those variations connect more to soil health than they do to variety or soil type, for example. Most of the scientists we were talking to said, no, the probably variations are pretty small, and the variations probably connect more to variety or soil type than anything else. And third was, is it possible to build a handheld, consumer-priced, non-invasive nutrient meter? Something that you can afford and put in your hand and use to flash lights at things and get readings. Because while the refractometer is probably still the best instrument we have now for testing quality, generally with the refractometer you have to take a chunk out of the apple, didn't squish it, to get the reading. And should you start doing that at the grocery store, the produce manager might become perturbed. Of course, you could take the apple home, like I was supposed to with the milk, and get readings, and that's something we're working to do with our local chapters to begin to bottom up grassroots this awareness. You get 5 people in a city, each one has a refractometer, bring home your shopping, test those crops, and post that on the internet. We can begin to bottom up, begin educating about the variation and where good stuff is already with refractometers. But so these were our three questions. Do nutrients vary dramatically? If they do they connect to soil health? And is it possible, if they do, to assess them with a handheld meter? And that is the project I discussed yesterday. And we have, to my confidence and a lot of people's confidence, we're now getting the papers published showing you how we did it all. Yes, nutrients do vary dramatically. Yes. The only connection in nutrient variation we found is to life in the soil, levels of life in the soil. And yes, we can build handheld meters at a consumer price point which are able to test those variations. Now, we were only looking at a couple of different nutrients in that first project. We were looking at copper and zinc and calcium and phosphorus as elements, maybe about 10 different elements. As well, we were looking at polyphenols and antioxidants, which are these sort of higher order compounds correlating with flavor and reversing disease. And we have calibrations right now for zucchini and polyphenols. You flash the light with a meter at zucchini, it'll tell you the level of polyphenols in that zucchini. With carrots, we use antioxidants. Right? We flash light at the carrots, we've got a calibration, it'll tell you the level of antioxidants in that carrot. Great. The meter works to show us the level of polyphenols in zucchini. how much do you really care about the level of polyphenols in zucchini, right? Like, what people want with a meter is, how good is this zucchini? 1 out of 100 overall, I want to know how good this zucchini is. And that's nutrient density. Like, there is currently, as it exists, no data set anywhere on the planet which has defined the spectrum of variation of nutrient levels in crops comprehensively. This is 80 out of 100, this is 20 out of 100. It has not been done for anything, anywhere, ever. And that's what we're doing. So starting in 2022 with the beef project, we started, after confirming these three first questions, we started with beef. Beef is the crop with the world's largest ecological footprint and economic footprint. There's more land used in the production of beef than anything else. There's more money spent on beef than anything else. And so we thought, if we're going to do this complex, expensive science project, let's focus on something that has a significant footprint. Cucumbers are nice, but that's maybe not a priority. So it's a complex, expensive project. The ballpark is about $1 million per crop in science it requires to do this work. And so let me just walk through the concept of what we're doing for that $1 million so you can get a hold on it. I'm going to show you a few slides that some of the preliminary results we've got so far for the beef project, and then we'll have time for question and answer. Our thought is, we don't know. When people say, this nutrient density is high, this has low nutrient density. I was talking to somebody last night who was talking about nutrient density of his beef. And I was like, I created the word nutrient density in 2007. There was no conversation, there was no word, it wasn't happening. So if anybody tells me they know what nutrient density is, I'm like, please. I don't know what nutrient density is. I know enough to know we don't know. So if you think you do know, please tell me. Otherwise, let's try not to bastardize this word. Let's try not to throw it around too readily, easily. Like, oh, it's level of polyphenols. Well, no, level of polyphenols is level of polyphenols. Well, it's trace elements. No, trace elements is trace elements. Nutrient density is the whole biochemical complex of the entire thing. So the way the beef project is working, each of the farmers who's taking part sends in a steak from 3 different animals. We do a very complex level of assessment of each of those steaks, looking at about 250 different nutrients, from elements to enzymes to vitamins to amino acids to fatty acids to polyphenols to terpenoids to phenolics. Hundreds of different nutrients are assessed in every steak. It costs about $500 per steak to do that lab work. As well, the farmers send in the manure from the animals, and we look at hundreds of different species of microbes in the manure, bacteria and archaea, etc. As well, they send in the fodder, whether it's the forage or the ration, whatever it is that the animals are eating. We send that in for assessment. As well, they send in the soil that fodder was produced in. As well, they answer a whole long list of management questions. How old was the animal? What was the variety? How were they managed? And then finally, we take the meat and we feed it to humans and see what happens to the humans' health metrics after they eat it. So our thought is, we don't know what nutrient density is. We're going to collect data on all these different components and then see where the patterns are. Our thought is that nature has patterns and these things connect. And we don't know what the answer is, but by thoughtfully collecting a large number of data points and then bringing in honest scientists to interrogate those data points, we can find those patterns. And when we find those patterns, we'll be able to say, this is what we think nutrient density is. This is the strategy we're engaging. And ideally, the hypothesis is that we'll find 6 or 8 different nutrients that are biomarkers, that are sort of the symptoms of nutrient density. And we can say this nutrient at this ratio and level, and that nutrient, that level of ratio equals the 80th percentile. And this one and that one at this level of ratio is the 30th percentile. Does that all make sense? Right, are people following? I know it's late, you're tired, and it's been a long, amazing couple of days, but I'm talking fast. Is everyone's following broadly? Okay, so when we figure that out, when we figure out those biomarkers, after doing all this complicated research, then we'll know what the people who want to build meters going forward need to calibrate their meters to. Right? It's impossible right now to have a meter that's calibrated to nutrient density because we don't know what nutrient density is. Does that make sense? So every time people are like, Dan, how's the meter going? I'm like, oh, it's possible, but we're not there yet. And this is why. And it's a long conversation. And it's an expensive process. It's about $1 million a crop. Beef's $1 million, milk's $1 million, wheat's $1 million, oats is $1 million, lamb's $1 million. $50 million, and we can define nutrient density for basically all the crops on the planet. $50 million is actually not much money to foundationally have the information necessary to transform agriculture globally. But because we're committed to doing this all categorically, openly, in the open source, in the commons, with no IP, no ROI, no benefit that an investor could receive for paying for this research, it's taken a while. Because it's based on donations. It's all being done on donations. People are like, Dan, when are you going to have the meter ready? Well, as soon as I get the money, then I can give you a time frame. It's not about how long it's going to take to do the work, it's about how long it takes to raise the money. And this is our limiting factor. I just want to get that all clear because these are questions that I get asked oftentimes. And people hear about this thing about the 100th monkey. You know about the 100th monkey? That concept? No? No? I can't remember the whole story behind it, but it's basically like this person has this understanding, that person has understanding, that person has understanding, and all of a sudden, everybody has understanding. So the more people I explain to how this works, the more people get it, the broader the field becomes, and then maybe more and more, all of a sudden, everybody will sort of intuitively get it. So I'm using you to like propagate coherence into the field so that this understanding can happen more broadly, if you don't mind. All right, so that's the broad strokes of what's going on. I'm very excited about where we're at with the beef project. It's confirming a lot of the theses we originally had. I'll run a few slides here to show you what we've got so far and what the results are, and then I look forward to Q&A for as long as we have time to discuss. Okay. Okay, these are the ingredients we're assessing. You guys can see the slides. I think I already basically covered that. Utah State University is the university where we're doing the metabolomics work. They're our primary research partner. Sample collection, in terms of bag, analytical workflow. We have way more people excited and taking part in this who are grass-fed beef producers than are corn-fed beef producers for potentially obvious reasons. It costs about $2,500 per farm to do the science. So when you add up all the meat and the manure and the soil and the forage and everything else, it's a decent cost. So, all right, location of the farms, primarily North America. You see some in South America, Europe. There's one there in Hawaii, Australia. We've got pretty broad geographic sampling from across North America, right? We've got all kinds of different soil types, climate zones, etc. I don't think there's anything in Mexico. Okay, so omega-6 and omega-3s. This is one of the things perhaps people have heard about, omega-6 and omega-3. Closer to that 1-to-1 ratio is better. Sort of 1-to-1 is optimal. Anything less than 2-to-1 is considered to be very good. Anything less than 4-to-1 is considered by the American Heart Association to be healthy. Anything more than 4-to-1 is considered to be unhealthy. So you can see the vast majority of the grass-fed beef samples are showing below 2-to-1. The average there is 1.7-to-1, and the best we found is 0.9. Okay, so this is actually those ones on top of the circle that says truly grass-fed. Came from a big company that in 2021, during COVID, when the ships carrying their meat from Australia were parked in the Pacific because they couldn't land in California, they had to go to an alternate supply chain to get what they thought was grass-fed beef, and they sent that in for a sample because they didn't really trust the people. And it sure looks like it's different than all the rest of the grass-fed beef. So, But this is a really simple one, right? Omega-6, omega-3, it's like why salmon is good for you and red meat is bad for you. It's because salmon has high levels of omega-3 and red meat has low levels of omega-3. Anybody heard that story? People following nutrition, right? Actually, cows that eat grass do not have high omega-6 ratios. They got balanced ones, right? There's a dramatic difference in the nutrient levels in the meat based on what the animals eat. You can see these ones over here on the right-hand side that say the grain-fed, sourced from smaller family farm feedlots. So just because your animals are eating grain does not mean they're necessarily bad. You see that range there from 3.5 to 1 to 14.4 to 1. That's a big range. So how you feed, what you feed, actually can have a does have a dramatic impact. It is entirely possible to buy grain, whole grain, sprout it, feed it to your cows, and have great omega-6 omega-3 ratios. Right? It's just a question of whether you take the whole grain and feed it to the animals that way. So there are ways in which you can have a feedlot, you can buy grain, you can feed it to your animals, and you can still get good nutrient levels. Right? One of the key points here is it's a continuum. Everything's a continuum. And that's what we're hoping to be able to characterize and define. So C18, 3N3, alpha-linoleic acid, what does that mean? I don't know. But basically you can see significant differences here between grass-fed and grain-fed, but there's also overlap. You see that overlap. Some of the samples that came in from the farmers saying this was grain-fed are looking better than some of the samples that came in saying grass-fed. So sometimes there's this bifurcation, grass-fed good, grain-fed bad. Really, actually, it depends on how the animals are treated. There's oftentimes also as well, there's like a, anybody know what pasture finished means in the beef industry? It means you can, as long as the cows are out on the pasture, you can dump as much grain in the pasture as you want them to eat. Right? Pasture finished. So there's all these labels out there in the market that people think mean something but actually don't. And so with empiricism, with science, with meters, we can read right through that. We can get right through the marketing, right through the labels, and really ascertain the foundational dynamic. What is the thing that correlates with the best omega-6 omega-3 ratio? It's diversity of the pasture, diversity of the sward. If you've got 1 or 2 species in the sward, you'll get decent response. 5 is better, 10 is even better than that. So the foundational dynamic here is diversity of the ecosystem correlates with superior nutrition. If there's any one foundational takeaway we've got so far, it's that. With the plant materials, with the roots and the leaves and the fruits and the grains, the one takeaway is the higher the level of life in the soil, the better the nutrient levels. With the animals here, what we're seeing is the greater the diversity of the plants, the better the nutrient levels. That's our core takeaway right now. Again, DPA and EPA. I'm going to run through these fairly rapidly. Soil-produced metabolites, you may have heard of ergothioneine. So we're showing that these compounds that are built by soil life are complexed into the plant and then into the meat as well. So there's all these plant secondary metabolites people may have heard about. Flavor compounds, anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, anti-diabetes compounds that are built in biological systems. Here's data showing that these compounds are built by soil life, by fungi in the soil. They're showing up in the meat. Right? It's going from the fungi to the plant, to the animal, and then into you. This is omega-3s. Polyculture pastures are the main correlate we found. What happens to humans when they eat grass-fed meat versus grain-fed meat? The omega-3s get higher when you eat grass-fed meat. They get lower when you eat grain-fed meat. I think omega-6 and omega-3 ratios, I think it's something like a 5 years extended life. If you have good omega-3 ratios in your blood, you live 5 years longer than other people. Like that one thing. It's not a small thing. And regular consumption of grass-fed meat correlates with good omega-3 levels in your blood, which correlates with extended life, among other stuff. Phytochemicals, catechol, you can see this difference in grass-fed versus grain-fed. I'm just going to move through here rapidly so you can see these variations. Asparagine, what the hell is that? I'm not sure. Transfer. Basically, the point is, you got higher levels of these compounds in the pasture, then you have higher levels in the meat. You have low levels in the TMR, you have low levels in the meat. Cows are what they eat. Greater plant diversity results in a higher nutrient density. Okay, so this is our preliminary work. We don't actually have a categorical definition of nutrient density thus far, but as we've gotten so far, this is what we found. So, like I said, about halfway through this $1 million project on meat. All right, I think I probably used more time than I should have, but we got a few minutes left for Q&A. All right.
Fantastic stuff, Dan. Thanks a million. Have a seat there and have a chat. I'll ask Dan 20 questions there for the next hour if we're going to settle in. Is there anybody in the audience? You don't have to sit. Don't. Anybody there down here on the side? That's
Hold on a minute.
yeah.
Does freezing affect these stuff?
No. Freezing will slow down the degradation.
Good question.
And it generally looks like slaughtering your animals in the fall when they've been eating pasture for the last 6 months is strategic. And feeding them hay over the winter and slaughtering them in the spring is not. You will see degradation of nutrient levels based on the fact that they weren't eating fresh fodder. And so you should slaughter in the fall and freeze it better than slaughter in the spring and have it be fresh.
Is it true that linoleic acid has an anti-carcinogenic effect on people? It's claimed in milk that it is one of the anti-carcinogenic properties. That's why we don't pasteurize. If you pasteurize, you do damage it. Have you heard this? Have you come across this in meat?
I don't know.
Yeah. It's on Ron Smith's book on raw milk. It's interesting.
I guess you probably know what you're talking about. I'm not a biochemist. I was talking to somebody here about milk at lunchtime, and what happens when you pasteurize milk and it sure looks like the act of pasteurization is highly destructive to the nutritional value of milk.
The linoleic acid is the anti-carcinogenic property.
I'll take your word on it. I don't know specifics.
That's a very good subject, and I think a lot of people in the audience responded very well when somebody mentioned food as medicine earlier on today. Do you have any view on that? Part of the whole thing, really?
I've got a couple of comments. If there's something that they call food but starts with the word junk, you should get rid of the food part and just call it junk. When all this talk about nutrient density and how you produce things and increase levels of this and that, the real bad thing is when you take food and you process it, ultra process it, and then it becomes junk, right? That's actually a much more significant issue in human health than the inherent nature of the food to begin with. I was using the example, I think, at lunch with people talking about wheat. You take any kind of wheat, whole wheat, and you grind it, and you mix it with a sourdough starter, and you let it sit for a couple of days, and you make sourdough bread, and you're going to have something that's pretty health promoting. You take a really high quality wheat, and you take the bran off of it, and then you mix them with all these leavening agents that are not yeast that cause it to get really big really fast, and they put it through, the oven in 10 minutes, and you've got white bread, and you've destroyed it. Right? It is a categorically destructive thing, and that's just bread. That's not talking about Twinkies and everything else. So it's a really important part of this conversation is the processing, and the more that you can control yourselves and control your family members, your children, in just not engaging the processed product thing, that's a great place to start. Right? Until we've got nuances of metrics and meters and things like that, a processed product is not food. Sorry.
Brilliant.
Yeah, sir. Just listening there, what you said, a concern would be that, given your kind of poking the bear, will the big companies come out with their own products and say that their chemical enhanced food is as good as what you have, say. And also, if you had the meat and you test the food, and you get the stuff cheaper then, or what's the plan? If one tomato in the same packet, will you get that cheaper?
I think, so there's a couple points in that. One is, as has happened with regenerative, now that it's a word that has momentum and people want to be associated with it, there's big companies that are trying to come in and make their own definition of it. And certainly that's beginning to happen with nutrient density. I could consider it to be a sign of success that now we've gotten to the point where people are trying to say, I've got nutrient-dense food, I've got nutrient-dense food, because like I said, it wasn't a word before. So getting to the point where people are not poo-pooing you, but trying to sideswipe it is like progress in the chain. We're vulnerable to that because we definitely are a small nonprofit with not a lot of money, with a very small communications budget. Our strategy is to engage as many allies as possible who have integrity and respect, a broad spectrum from grassroots individuals and organizations to companies to researchers to governmental agencies. We do have actually starting to be a number of companies who are trying to differentiate themselves. I think I can say publicly, some of them, people may have heard of ButcherBox. Maybe they haven't heard of ButcherBox, but they're a meat by mail scheme, and I think they're north of $500 million a year. And their claim to fame is they've got grass-fed meat. Applegate is another company that is part of Hormel, which is Hormel's a major multinational. And Applegate similarly is working to differentiate themselves based on the nutritional caliber of their food. So what we're doing is aligning ourselves with companies who want to differentiate themselves from the supply chain based on nutritional caliber. They're helping to pay for the research. Their results are in their interest. They're beginning to market that out there. And so, who knows how it'll transpire going forward. But there are certainly economic interests who can benefit from this. And the economic interests who don't benefit from it, I think perhaps, at least thus far, are not really aware of what we're up to. So the longer we can fly under the radar and keep it a bit, fuzzy, the better. Strategically, keeping all the information open source is part of a way to prevent ourselves from being co-optable. In many cases, I've studied through my life of someone has a great, makes a great invention, like free energy device or whatever, and whoever it is, Chevrolet or something, comes along and says, actually, we don't want your free energy device to come out there, here's $1 million. The person says, no, I'm going to keep it. And then they get a bullet to the head, right? So we're aware of these things. And one strategy to avert them is to have everything be in the commons constantly. So there's nothing to lock up. You can't control it, you can't hide it because it's out in the commons for everyone. So that's our strategy: is transparency, empiricism, integrity, and we'll see how it plays. Yeah.
I suppose then because you've nothing to hide. You know what I mean? You can be like that because there's no secrets in the closet ready to come out. You're trying to do the best with the food for the people buying it. So why would it be transparent? It works perfectly for what you do.
I think it's strategic. I'm a chess player. Right? This is like, how do you win? This is how do you understanding there are significant countervailing forces. What's the strategy to actually get to a point where things can be transformed for the better?
Question on the back there?
Yeah, Don, I'd suggest that flying under the radar, even though you're not on social media, is not really, it's not realistic. They're going to be watching you. Big Ag is going to be watching you. And what I would say is that looking at, if you take the United States and you have so much GM agriculture, is there a chance that they would use GM as a way to mimic nutrient density in food through advanced GM techniques?
I say if they can, bring it on. I used to be an anti-GMO activist, and my position right now is if they can do as good a job or better with genetic modification than nature can, bring it on. I say I'm happy to work with Monsanto. They've got an amazing global distribution supply chain. If they want to help, get the word out about this, I'm not opposed to working with anybody. I'm excited about the moment when McDonald's and Burger King are competing with each other about the quality of the beef in their burgers, right? Like, the vision here is let's let everybody make more money doing the right thing. Because money drives the world. Somebody's got to hold the integrity of the data, but once that's created, then come on in and make more money doing the right thing. That's what's going to drive it. That's what's going to build it and bring it to the next level.
I think that if there's a book in this, you should call it "Not All Carrots Are Created Equal."
No carrots.
Is there time for it? We're done? Yeah, okay. That's one more. Two more.
More up here.
I didn't so much blame the man there sitting down. No time for that one. Just out of place.
Sean's getting tired too.
A question at the back and then a question at the front. Yes.
That's what you do.
Go ahead.
A curious one. How quickly does nutrient density in beef adjust to the diet of the animal that's eating it?
Very good. Yeah. So as it pertains to cows specifically, about 1 to 2% of their flesh is replaced every day. So people may have heard about this thing. You get new blood every 2 weeks. You get new bones every 7 years. You get a new body on average every 6 months. Anybody heard that one? You get a new body every 6 months? Right. So the cow gets new flesh every 3 months. So what the cow eats in the last 3 months of its life has a hell of a lot to do with what's in it when you slaughter it. So the cow can eat grass for the first 18 months and it spends its last 6 on grain. What would happen if you drank beer and ate pizza for 6 months?
I look like me.
I think you look worse than that. Right? You can eat well and be, spend the first 30 years of your life in good shape, and then, you lose it, and then you fall apart. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. We're talking about feeding animals things they shouldn't eat, which causes them to get fat, to get high levels of inflammation, to get diabetes, right? I mean, we have the biomarkers. We're not just looking at pro-nutrients in the meat. We're looking at anti-nutrients. We're looking at inflammation marker. We're looking at pre-diabetic biochemistry, right? We're looking at stress hormones. And all these things you can see in the meat, right? Animal welfare. If anybody cares about the happiness of their animals, all these things show up in the meat, just like we can see them. If you know about irritable bowel syndrome and people's gut flora being off, that's why we're testing the manure. We can see the overall health of the animal based on who the microbes are in their poop, just like you can do with humans. It's the same microbes basically. So yeah.
Yeah, just a comment. The vegan, or not the vegan, but the carnivore diet has been driven by the fact, one of the reasons it's been driven by the fact that the essential fatty acids, you can't get anything better than a steak. It has all the essential fatty acids in a balanced proportion. There's very eggs are probably the next that will come near this, or fish. So, but if people want to be vegans, they might get one essential fatty acid in a cabbage or something. So they have to be a very diverse diet, and there hasn't been a vegan population in history that survived. They might have been there, but they didn't survive. Beef is about the best thing, and it's been so. We had a small bit of it here yesterday. It's been so sort of made look dirty, and I really hate this. We want to get up off our ass, And the last comment is that one of the figures yesterday, 58% of our beef has been finished now in feedlots. This is a tragedy, This is taking grass-fed, but not finished. It's taking from an omega-3 to an omega-6. Okay, it's a tragedy.
It's bad for the animals. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for us. People talk about animal agriculture being bad for the environment. It is, if it's done that way. If it's done in the way of nature, with all of the gazelles and on the Serengeti plain, right? The Serengeti was animal agriculture and a beautiful, profound, fecund ecosystem, right? If you think about that, that's animal agriculture. That's not a bad thing. If you think about the bison, as I was saying earlier, on the American, prairie, that's animal agriculture being managed proactively by humans, right? We don't understand how the Native Americans were very proactively managing the way the bison were roaming. The Aborigines in Australia were doing the same thing with the kangaroos. Anybody know about how sophisticated the Aborigines were in Australia? Brilliant. Brilliant. There was 10% organic matter across the entire continent when Captain Cook landed. 1770, I thought it was 1820. We were debating this yesterday. It's 1770 when Captain Cook landed. 10 to 12% organic matter across Australia. The English couldn't ride their horses across it because the soil was too spongy. Right? Managed for 60,000 years proactively by humans in a very sophisticated fashion. We have models of humans managing ecosystems, actively using animals as key components of that balanced climate, proactive health. That is the way we should be working with the land. It's not about cows good, cows bad. It's about how, right? So, yes, it is a travesty. And as I said before, think about animal welfare, think about the well-being of the animals. I care just as much about soybeans, right? Think about every being is a being. And how we're doing agriculture is applicable across the kingdoms.
And you guys will have to catch Dan when he comes back to speak to Knots. I think, is that on the cards?
Yeah, February, I think, is the start, the first 2 days, isn't it?
So the thought is, for those who've taken my 2-day course, which we did with Knots in 2018, I believe it was. I'm not quite sure. It was a number of years ago. I have been doing a 2-day course I help principles of biological systems for at least 12 or 13 years now. For quite some time, people have been asking for it to be broadened, deepened. 2 days is great, but can we take a little more time and go into things a little more deeply? So I'm very excited to have that happening for the first time here in Ireland, starting in February. The 2-day course, I like to walk you through the growing season. We start with the fall in concept and practices, then we go to the winter, then we go to the spring, then we go to the summer. Call it a circle. Usually day 1 is fall and winter, day 2 is spring and summer. The way we're planning on doing it this year is February will be fall and winter. The 2 days in February will be fall and winter, and then the 2 days in April will be spring and summer. So we've got more time to dig in deeply. Had a great conversation with David Wallace last night at dinner about all the work that's been done at Danu and some of the systemic issues. I think I took it a little bit lightly when I first came here. People talking about the Irish context. I was like, well, the Irish context, principles of biological systems are applicable everywhere. Well, temperature, humidity, historical dynamics. There are systemic issues that each bioregion struggles with. Those are issues that I am less well versed with, but I think you have an amazing community of wisdom here, and so I'm really looking forward to not being the only presenter, but having it be much more of an interactive deep dive into some systemic solutions, collectively discerning and experimenting with that perhaps are still being struggled with. So really looking forward to that, and thank you, Sean, for
show your appreciation to them.